Yeah, thanks for that, Sam. So, hello, dear payroll, HR, accounting, whoever professional to the webinar. We're going to dive into global payroll management. For those of you who've heard me speaking before, you will recognize this slide because we're not just going to talk about a vendor solution or a process. We're going to look at a holistic approach to actually rock global payroll management. And what I used to do, and what I advise everyone to do, is to look at it from 4 different perspectives that I used to refer to as pillars. So we first have a bucket of strategy, where we design a purpose statement. What's the reason why we always go to work and never go to sleep? Because we're still crunching numbers. What is our promise to our company and our stakeholders and our employees? And what is the brand that we are representing? Just like any business that you work for, you represent a brand. Therefore, also the payroll represents a brand, which typically results in terms like you want to be trusted, you want to be supportive, you want to challenge your status quo. So what can others expect from payroll when they interact with yourself? And then we'll discuss some guiding principles of how you design your process or set up your structures around governance or around your organizational structure. And the real thing we'll dive into is service delivery models. Of course, being ahead of service delivery, of course, I want to touch on service delivery models. And I think those would kind of work as an archetype for you to think about, hey, how am I delivering payroll across all my markets, countries, regions, and what types of service do I actually need? We'll then move to governance, where we will look at some KPIs, so key performance indicators, how to manage and track the efficiency and effectiveness of your process. We'll also then move to risk and control. Of course, inherently, we check, recheck, and check again. But maybe we should design controls that allow us to check once and be comfortable hitting that approve button and uploading payments to our bank portals. And also you would have some standards such as, hey, this would be our permitted by law, our standard pay dates across the globe because it allows for a standardized process. We would have certain cutoffs that we work towards. And of course, our dear friends from HR allow us to push forward many times to allow us for sufficient time. Or maybe we would want a separate cutoff for certain upstream inputs. Then we have some roles and responsibilities. Within the payroll process, you would want to implement the 4 I's principle and not one looking in the mirror, because you would basically be me, myself, and I, but we would want a serious segregation of duties, depending on the scope of your team, of course, but you would at least want a reviewer, preparer, and an approver within your cycle. We'll then look at the operating model, the organigram, the data and system flows of all the various inputs that we receive, of course, flawlessly that we can import and enter directly into all of our systems. Ways of working, performance reviews, where you would review KPIs, or maybe with your vendors, you would have an operational and technical review. And then we'll move into the actual delivery, doing. And we'll spend quite some time on this, on the international payroll process. I think my beloved friends from marketing already posted something on LinkedIn about that 20-step process. And it's really something for you to take to your organization and explain to those stakeholders of how the actual payroll process works, and that there's actually no magic button that we push at the end of the month. And then we'll look at inquiry management. So that kind of sets the scene of how to holistically approach global payroll management. Before we move, Sam, this might be a bit overwhelming to some of the folks, also to those that I've spoken to in the past. You don't need to address this all at the same time, because we don't have the luxury to just carve out 3 weeks of our month to sit down and say, hey, let's strategize, or let's look at our total governance models. But if there would be one thing you would do, at least list down your process and work your way up there, because we always need to be audit ready, and all of this needs to be documented. In my prior organizations where we've had audits, we've always had a good to excellent audit result because we had all of this documented. So I just encourage you to at least schedule an hour or 2 per month in your calendar to address all these different pillars. Now, let's move into those service delivery models. Oh, we're smooth, Sam. 1 week in Payzaar. Very good transition. So if we look at the service delivery models, and you would look at the scope within your organization, you would most likely have different entities within a country. You would have countries of different sizes. You would even have different payroll setups, such as a non-resident payroll, an entity, or maybe an employer of record or PEO organization to address some of your hiring into the new markets. Well, as your scope grows, your complexity grows, and therefore also your grouping becomes more important, because you would approach your, maybe if you're sitting in the US, your domestic payroll of 10 to 15,000 employees, you would approach that differently and solution that differently than you would your smaller scale countries where you might have 1 to 10 employees. You would want a different level of automation. And I think also in one of the most recent Gartner reports where they address the multi-country payroll service landscape, that they've actually started to recognize that the only one size fits all is hybrids. Meaning there isn't a single global payroll provider that can truly fit all your needs as you grow your company. You will have to make some choices, especially if you want to standardize that across the globe. Now, if you kind of looked at those country groupings, you might end up in large, small, and medium countries. You would then want to map out 3 key components of the service delivery model, which would be your service levels, your automation, and your vendor solution. You know, there will be different appetites for a 10,000 employee payroll than a 2 employee payroll. Because if you would only have 2 employees, you would likely have very few changes from month to month or pay period to pay period. So would you really want to build an integration for your 2-person payroll somewhere in Colombia or the Netherlands for that matter? You would most likely not, because you would kind of overdo it. Whereas for your 10,000 employee payroll, maybe domestically or in your headquarters, you would want high levels of automation, and you would also want different service levels. Maybe if you're running that large payroll, you would rather have process intimacy, full control on the end-to-end process, and run your payroll in-house, and you would license a best-of-breed software in any location. If you would have your small countries, you probably need a lot of additional service, such as secretarial work, maybe some advisory, some tax accounting, some local audit representatives. So you would want to choose your business process outsourcing. And with that, you would also want different levels of automation, because if you would look at the different vendor solutions for that 2-person payroll in the Netherlands, let's just call out the Netherlands, they might not take your raw PDF formats as input because they might want to have data points. But you might not have the capacity to learn Dutch, although I encourage everyone to learn Dutch, but you might not learn Dutch. So you might want to send those letters of the Dutch tax authorities or those wage tax forms in a raw PDF format. So you need a different type of service than just a best-of-breed software to run your payroll process for you domestically. So therefore, you will also end up with a different vendor solution. Now, if you by now have read the text there, normally I would not have plugged Payzaar in this, but of course now I do. So you most likely, with those different service levels, with the different levels of automation, find different vendor solutions per country grouping, because one size fits all is hybrid. But you would still want to get that overlayer of control, centralized data, reporting and analytics. We also came across a lot of platforms such as aggregators or maybe some accounting networks that work very well, but maybe lack centralized GL reporting. So you might just want to complement something to create your standardized GLs. With that, you kind of overlay it. And to make this less abstract, I think, Sam, we have a typical company on the next slide. All right. So this is kind of how it works, which I also encourage you to map out for your own organization. So we would have Group A, which would be 2,000 employees or 1 to 2,000 employees with high complexities, which in this case would be 5 countries and having 10,000 employees in total. You would have your Group B, or maybe your medium to small, where you have 1,000 employees, but it's in 15 countries. So you would have higher country size, therefore higher complexity, because as we all know, you might know payroll for one country and you know the common payroll process, but you will not have in-depth knowledge, unless you're called Tim Kelsey, of all the different types of country payrolls. And for those 5 countries, it might be scalable enough to actually get into the depths of the local payrolls. So if we would then per group, A and B, map out those service levels, automation and vendor solutions, we could come to a picture like this, which is very industry standard. So for Group A, you would have an in-house solution, which you can go with, for instance, with SAP SuccessFactors, or you could go with Workday Payroll, or whatever you would want to choose, but you would want to run that payroll in-house, whether that would be a local team, a central team from one location, or maybe a shared service center. Because of the high volumes and a lot of different changes, you would also want high levels of automation. So what you're looking for is integrations with your HRIS system. You might want to get integration with your time and attendance system. You might want to get integrations with your benefits or your equity to make sure you move away from those manual processes and make sure you get it automated. You also want to get standardized workflows. For instance, you upload all or integrate all the data, but you then also want to have that automated validation in the payroll process to reduce that cycle time. And of course, you want high levels of reporting, because as we all know, when the cycle's over, the questions come. Hey, why did we have so many joiners, leavers, or movers? Or hey, why is the salary and wages account, GL account, up so much month over month or year over year? So you want to be able to pull those reports for your colleagues, or even give them self-service access. Now, if you would then go to market for your vendor solutions, you would most likely be in a best of breed of local software. Now, for those smaller scale countries, you might want to have a mix of maybe managed service for those countries that are above 500 or above 750, because that's scalable enough, also from a vendor perspective, for economies of scale to run a process. You would want a robust system. But for the smaller countries, you might want to use the PPO for the reasons I mentioned before. And a term I use throughout my career is fit for purpose automation, because sometimes you will have either vendors or internal IT partners always looking at, we want to automate everything, but you would want a fit for purpose automation. Again, for that 2-person payroll, you don't need a lot of automation. You can do with upload inputs and make sure you have a good workflow. You might even do manual entries for low volumes. Now, in terms of vendor solutions, and again, these are just some examples, you could find your local vendors and contract with them directly, because typically you would get the best price and you could actually choose your local vendors, or you could maybe choose an accounting firm who typically have a wide spread of countries that they will use, and you will get one type of experience. Now, those cells are merged because if you would have these different vendor solutions, you would have best of breed local software in 5 countries for Group A. You might have different local vendors and an accounting firm. But then you will get that question from an auditor. So how does your consistent workflow works within the roles and responsibilities as you've detailed it? Then you'll have to explain around 7 to 8 different ways of working. If you would get a question from the reward, when it's time again for the salary increases. Hey, what have we paid across the sales teams across all the countries the past year? You would have a hard time crunching the numbers in our beloved tool, Excel. You would need to pull all the data with all kinds of local codes. And those are real life questions that we know we always get. Or you will get a question from the payroll accountants or from the external accountants where you would need to run reports around fluxes. This is where you would need a centralized platform around it. So you could, of course, choose a platform like Payzaar to complement that. It will also allow you the flexibility to remain standardized as you grow as a company. Hopefully you grow as a company without changing that user interface for your payroll teams, without changing those ways of working. So this is kind of a standard service delivery model of this day and age. Mark and Sam, you will chip in as needed. So if not, then I'm at least saying the truth so far. So let's move to the next one. All right, so we jumped into the strategy part, service delivery model. We now go to the actual delivery and the payroll processes. Now, arguably so, they are generally designed at 3 different levels. You would do first your process groupings, like, hey, at a high level, what kind of processes do I actually have? You would then go into the more detailed level, level 2, where you would have process steps. And I've articulated 20, and then you would have supporting documentation, which could be your work instructions, could be your standard operating procedure whatsoever. So let's move into the process groups, Sam. So This is actually a picture that I've used in Dutch to explain to my daughter of 6 years old what daddy does. Okay, it didn't go well the first 5 minutes, but I can tell you after 10 to 15 minutes, she kind of knew what I had to do. So I explained that most of my time is about gathering all the right information, which is the pre-payroll process. I think my friends from Payzaar have already indicated that it's around 60% of the time. I think that's right. It could be 70, it could be 50, but still, we are as good as the inputs that we get, and it's not rubbish in, rubbish out, because we always ensure that we don't have rubbish out, but it might be rubbish in, non-compliance out, because we don't know what we don't know. So we spend most of the time on the pre-payroll part. We then go to the run part, which again, my daughter thought that I was actually running a marathon in that phase of the payroll process, but it's not. It's when actual processing engines, whether in-house, whether outsourced, start processing your payrolls and delivering outputs. We will then go to the post-payroll part, where we will do the GL reporting, the payments, statutory filing. Now, then we might have some non-cyclic processes that come, maybe once a year, that maybe come irregularly. And that's kind of overlaid from, I should probably do, it's always reversed at Zoom. I should know because I worked at Zoom. So it's payroll control framework that kind of overlays all these processes. Now, this is your level 1 process groups. This will take you 2 minutes of time. Let's move to the next level. We always go a level deeper. Now, I'll take a sip of tea so you could digest this very busy slide, and I'll then talk to it. So this kind of details, and I might add a common outsourced payroll process. And I would love to hear in the comments if this resonates or not. I hope it does, because otherwise I cannot change the slides anymore. But do let me know if this resonates with you. So from the pre-payroll phase, we have that 5-step process where we collect and review payroll input data. We process the inputs, whether that's in a format that we need to get the data into because our vendor dictates a certain format, or we need to digest tickets like, hey, you need to do a PTO payout for 5 days. Yeah, but we actually need hours. Or you have your commission files or your equity files in a central central currency, for instance. Typically, equity is in US dollars, so you would still need to translate that into whatever local currency rule-based FX rates. You would then enter or upload that, again, fit for purpose. You might want to enter it for low volumes, or upload or integrate the input data as so fits per your country grouping. You would then complete your payroll controls. So you would have one person collecting and reviewing the input, entering and uploading the input, but of course you also want a reconciliation against those sources to make sure that what you are sending to the provider is actually accurate. And if we have any providers on the call, I presume you agree with me that you would want very good data inputs for your payroll submission, because you will have stringent SLAs and deadlines where you need to return the results. And the better the quality of the data of the client, of the payroll professionals, the faster the payroll cycle will go. Now, then you hit that payroll submission button, or whatever that's called, to make sure that all the data flows to your local partner in a country. We then move to running the payroll. And I see some comment, it might be a sprint, it might be a marathon, but at least there's some sweat involved. So we then do clarify payroll submissions. So whatever data points we send, there might always be questions because we're not aware of any local nuances. Our data might not have been accurate enough. So there's always some back and forth. And I hope everyone agrees that we want to refrain from email contact about those submissions, but you want to do that through a secure platform where you can actually communicate with those vendors with an audit log, because I think we should be moving away from those emails now. Now, hopefully by step 7, everything is clear and the trial results are at your disposal to do your validations. This is also where those controls come in. You see the little boxes CTR. It stands for this purpose in control. And you see the heaviest part of the control sits at step 7 and 9, because this is when you will be crunching the numbers, doing the input versus the output, where you will do your variance control, your threshold control, maybe your detailed payslip analysis. You might run a year-over-year variance, or if you have a certain bonus month, you might want to compare it to the prior year bonus month. This is when we trial the results. And you see Sam added this nice little arrow where you would see a loop between 7 and 8. Hopefully you will achieve first time right, but you might request a trial result. either because your input was incorrect or you received late inputs after cutoff. I know it never happens, but in a rare event that it does happen, you will get some inputs after the cutoff and you're begged to include it. You would then need to request a trial run. Or the vendor has just processed the payroll incorrectly. You would want this 7 to 9 period to be as condensed as possible. Have that stringent SLA to make sure this doesn't delay your overall process. Now, you then want to complete your run payroll controls, because who might know that an auditor comes in, either internal or external, to look at how you've actually validated that your payroll results are correct. So you need to make sure you have that right control evidence, because if you run a payroll control but you have no evidence, it's not a control. Because if you can't evidence it, it didn't happen. So therefore, you can never evidence in the future that you actually did your verifications. Now, hopefully by step 10, we will be able to approve payroll results and funding. Because once we hit that payroll approve button, we start the post-payroll process. So we start processing salary and compliance payments, hopefully automated or within your own banking platform. You might have a provider who has access to your platform, upload the payments and release those for you. Sometimes you have a compliance payment that's a little bit trailing, because sometimes it's 1 month in arrears, or you might have quarterly ones, but that's what you want to do. And then you want to release your pay slips and your employee documentation to your employees, hopefully through a very consistent employee portal with a nice UX. Then you go and submit your financial postings, or maybe it's part of your own scope. You need to create those yourself and do your reconciliations. You would then at step 14 want to complete your post-payroll controls and move you to your performance dashboard. And we'll talk a little bit about the KPIs in that performance dashboard in a second. I won't spend too much time on the non-cyclic processes, but of course, it's June. If you run your payroll calendars on a calendar year basis, you will likely start in the time frame October, November to start detailing those out. All right. Thanks for the feedback, by the way. Let's move to the next one. So I'll spend less time on this one, but creating a process group doesn't take a lot of time. Creating this one, especially because you will get the slides, doesn't take a lot of time, because the sequence will most likely be the same. Now, the support and documentation is where the tedious part starts, because you might design processes in a slide pack and everybody will say, yeah, great, but how does it actually work? You would then want to create flowcharts in Visio or Lucidchart to make sure you list down the positions, not names, because people change, roles don't. So you want to list down those roles and say, how does the data flow? Who has a decision and who has a consulting right? Or, how does it all flow? You want to have that in your flowchart, aligned with your roles and responsibilities. I think everyone on the call doing payroll loves checklists. Well, I do too. So you would have a checklist for your each stage of the process. Make sure you update those, and that's also where you can capture any types of local nuances. Like, hey, in the pre-payroll, if there is a starter in Spain, you would need to register them before their start date. If there is something different happening in the US, I believe the beloved example is California, you would actually need to settle the termination on or before the term date. You would have your payroll calendars, hopefully in a centralized platform, not anymore in a G sheet or an Excel spreadsheet. You would have your calendars. And if you have your benefits, your equity, all mapped out into the local taxability, because a benefit could be, a medical benefit could be taxable in one country, it could be a non-taxable addition in another country, or it could be a fringe benefit. All of those details you want to lay down in a process, map your pay codes on a local level, on a global level accordingly. And then you might want to create a standard operating procedure. All right. A framework. Who doesn't love a framework? So a payroll control framework that we kind of overlaid on the global payroll process. So this kind of gives a snap view of a framework. If you report into finance or accounting, they would want to make sure that you have robust controls. Also from an HR perspective, but they might be more interested in the end result, compliance and employee experience and satisfaction. But still, this is worthwhile looking into. So at each stage of that process group, you will have different type of controls that will require different type of systems. And you see those checklists at the bottom that you will have for each stage. Now, for your pre-payroll controls, as I mentioned, you want to do input to source to upload reconciliation, and you want it as automated as possible. I think Mark later on will also detail how we solutioned it with something called HR Connect, where you spend less time on validating while validating more. So that's always the balance we want to do in payroll, do more with less, and you would need the tools for that. Now, run payroll controls leading up to payroll approval. You want to do input to result or output reconciliation, maybe some pay slips. I always used to at least ask the team or do myself 1 to 4 pay slip reconciliations on a manual basis, because you can only trust a system so far, at least a local system. Make sure those new pay elements actually roll up to gross, roll up to a certain accumulator. And you might also want to review a pay statement, a local statutory filing towards the GTM, because in the end, the GTM hits the GL. The GL will be reconciled by a cash process saying, hey, this is what we paid to the employees, this is what we paid there. You want to make sure that that all reconciles. We'll then have a typical variance and threshold control. You want to have some SOD in your payroll platform, segregation of duties. Someone can see a certain group of entities, somebody can see anything on an employee level or not. And you also want the payroll cycle rules. And payroll cycle rules, like, okay, for each pay period, you would want to assign a preparer, a reviewer, and maybe an approver. And although this might sound scary, I always encourage everyone to rotate maybe every 3 months or at least every 6 months, because payroll people also want to go on leave without checking their email or their payroll approvals. Now, that might sound scary because we do sometimes have a fear of missing out because we're so invested in getting those results. But by switching those responsibilities across regions, across countries, you start to build your team knowledge and unlock the knowledge that's in our heads and have them written on a piece of paper. Now you have those payroll playbooks and taxability matrices. This is kind of a framework that you can overlay to your payroll process and discuss with your stakeholders, whether internal or external. Okay, Sam. Yes, KPIs. KPIs, well, you only know how good you are if you measure yourself. I think there was a more beautiful statement on that, but I've lost the exact wording used. But what you would typically see is you would measure your effectiveness, you would measure your efficiency and the overall inquiry experience. If we look at the first one, the effectiveness, you would want to deliver accurate, compliant, and timely pay results. That's the bread and butter of a payroll department. We need to get this right, otherwise nothing else matters, as Metallica said. And therefore you also want to measure that. Industry standard is to design 3 KPIs at least for that, which would be your payroll input accuracy. So what was the quality of your data before you approved your payroll results? You want to have pay delivery accuracy. So how many errors were found, typically by employees or payroll accountants, after you've approved payroll? Of course, you want that to be as minimal as possible, but hey, it can happen. And then payment dates met. You don't want to miss a payment date that's agreed in the employment agreements. If you would go to efficiency, you want to operate standardized processes in condensed timelines. The typical payroll professionals are always pressured to move the cutoff upwards, and by the accountants to pull the GL files forward, which then means you have less of a period to run that. So why don't you measure and benchmark within your own scope your efficiency? And again, 3 KPIs to do that. Payroll's first time right. So whenever you will get that payroll results, if I recall from memory, that's step number 7 in the payroll process, you would want to hit approval on the first time. And how to achieve that is to get the right partners, the right systems, the right upstream, because the faster you approve payroll, the faster you can deliver results. You also want to look at your payroll processing days, which you could measure from your cutoff to your payment date, or maybe your submission to your results, but do it consistently so you can benchmark yourself. And then a typical indication of a process not working, either upstream or downstream, would be an off-cycle or advances. If you maybe miss to pay out a commission or a bonus, an employee is inclined to get the net result, so you might pay in advance. Or you might do off-cycles because you never got those bonuses on time for your cutoff. And you would want to list those because you could also then show to your partners, hey, this is what it does to the process. Our books were closed later because we had to run an off cycle. Our overall cost of running payroll increased because our vendor, of course, charged an additional fee for the off cycles. Then in terms of the positive inquiry experience or case management, this is sometimes a scary part, but why don't you ask the employees if they're satisfied with your results? Because we've still not found the first employee on pay date who says, awesome, thanks for the wonderful, beautifully designed payslip. It looks awesome. The colors, the mechanics, the mathematical parts of it, I love it, and you've paid me on time. So why don't you proactively ask them? Ask them if they were happy with the speed and the quality of your results. This is kind of how to detail the KPIs. And I believe we have a more detailed slide as well, Sam, that for the purpose of this webinar, looking at the clock, I might just skip, but we'll also share this across the entire group. All right. Then I think I want to hand over to my dear colleague, as I now can say, Mark.
Fantastic. Thanks, Max. Great job walking through some of these frameworks and how to organize your payroll operation environment. I think I've seen some of the slides from what you shared here before, but they continue to resonate a lot, and I think they are a fantastic way to kind of put everything together and just see how everything end-to-end connects up. And what we want to share with you now here in the next section a bit is, as Max has laid out, some of the key focus areas and challenges that you will typically encounter in a global payroll environment. And at the very beginning, you talked about also how you organize yourself needs to be assessed and determined in context of the kind of footprint that you have in a country, whether you're dealing with large, complex employee populations, small populations, will certainly mean that there's different requirements in terms of how you organize yourself and the process that you put in place. What we at Payzaar, how we try to address these challenges is we have different modules that allow you to basically use technology in order to drive better control through your payroll environment and increase the team's efficiency and hopefully improve some of the KPIs that Max was just talking about on the previous slide in terms of accuracy and effectiveness, but also the efficiency in terms of getting things done in less time with less resources that are required to do a good job. So just talking through the different modules that we have that come into play in a global payroll environment. We have on the left-hand side what we consider to be the core foundational modules of any payroll operation environment. So it starts with the operation control module, which essentially help you to structure and organize your day-to-day workflows, right? As Max pointed out, in any payroll operation, there's lots of different tasks and sub-process steps that need to happen, and just keeping control of those and tracking those. What's the current status? Who's working on what? Are we on schedule relative to our payroll calendar and cutoff dates? Is very important. You want to ideally have some automated escalation mechanisms built in that if someone is not able to take care of the tasks that they are normally assigned to, it automatically pushes that action, the task forward to a replacement person or someone who will step in to take care of the execution of the process. There's lots of stakeholders involved in any payroll process, different internal functions, HR, payroll, benefits, finance, and so on, as well as, of course, when you do have an outsourced payroll environment, external stakeholders. We're dealing with very, very sensitive employee information that's being exchanged and managed as part of the process. So having a highly secure, well-managed communication collaboration environment is critical. Email, I think everyone would agree, is not the tool, not the mechanism that serves that purpose. So in our platform, we have a central communication and collaboration environment with very specific user profiles and access rights, who can do in that environment, and who can see what and manipulate what. And we believe that's a much better way to manage the exchange of information, the activities that need to happen in your payroll process. And then Max touched upon KPIs. I think the saying is, what gets measured gets done, and I forget who said it, but I think it's very important, and I think there's lots of opportunity in the payroll operations process, because it's something that happens on such a regular basis, right? Monthly or bi-weekly or weekly, that it lends itself to really keep track of how well we're executing, how well we're doing things, and having these KPIs, we can see whether things are trending in the right direction or moving in the wrong direction, and what's causing that. I think there's great opportunity there, and we, as part of our digital workflow environment, it allows us to basically have visibility and keep track of every activity that takes place in your payroll operation environment, and automatically start to pull together these KPI dashboards in terms of end-to-end cycle time. Are we on time? Are we late? How much time has passed between different tasks? So it's great to get that kind of visibility into your payroll operations. On the bottom then, reporting analytics. Of course, payroll's the super data intensive function, and there's just a wealth of information that gets collected from all parts of the organization, out of your HR systems, out of your payroll system, out of your finance systems. Unfortunately, when you have payroll running across lots of different jurisdictions and inherently in different local payroll engines, calculation engines that actually are used to process your payroll in a compliant manner, it becomes very difficult to create a consolidated view of what's actually happening across the entire organization. And if you have queries that might come in from your senior executive stakeholders about where the company is spending cost, or what's causing your labor cost to move in one direction or another, things like overtime or sick leave, or how much severance pay is the company spending on certain parts of the organization. If you're trying to do that and create insights across different parts of the organization, maybe even benchmark how we're doing in this part of the organization versus in other parts of the organization, that becomes this very time-consuming exercise. We have clients that tell us they spend weeks on just answering queries, and by the time you've collected all that information, finally, unfortunately, a lot of times it already starts to become outdated. So within our platform, we basically pull in the payroll, HR, finance information out of different local systems, and we have a smart mechanism that allows us to map and harmonize and normalize data elements, pay elements that come out of different local payroll systems, and basically relate them to each other, map them. We call tagging methodology, so that we understand what each pay element actually corresponds to. And that then allows you to build these central data views and central data queries that you can build out. Lots of self-service built into our platform as well. So you don't need to submit a service request and wait for a week until someone picks up the service request and sends you back the report. You can just build your own customer reports and run them as often as you like. Talk about the data that gets us to the elements, the modules in the middle of this slide. So payroll obviously doesn't live in a vacuum. Payroll sits, as I always like to say, sits smack dead center at the intersection between finance on the one side and your HR data landscape on the other side. And so we constantly need to get data out of our HR source systems, whether it's your HRS or your time and attendance system, your commission system, your equity systems. We need to get that data into our payroll processes. And as Max alluded to, in many payroll operations today, that's still a very manual data re-entry type of scenario that we're encountering. And this is where HR Connect helps to basically, what we do with HR Connect is we take data, we source data, we import data out of the HR source systems, whatever that might be, whether it's a Workday or SAP SuccessFactors or some local benefit software that the client is using. We import that into Payzaar, and then we map it and translate it into the data structures and the formats that the local payroll software can understand. Some vendors, I've previously worked at one of the large global vendors, starts with an A and ends with a P, and you might be familiar with flexi forms that you need to fill in so that the local payroll provider and the local payroll software can have the complete picture of what needs to be processed. And we basically collect all this, the data fields that are required to process a payroll in the local context and compliant manner automatically by pulling these exports out of the source system and mapping them to the data fields that are required to run the local payroll. Similarly, on the downstream part of the process, I suppose Max called that the post-payroll part, we then map the data from the payroll, what comes out of the payroll engines, the gross to net. We map that to the client's chart of account. So that's obviously a very important part of the end-to-end process to make sure that the financial systems get correctly updated with all the details on what was actually processed and the payroll that was the financial transaction that has taken place between the company and the employee. And again, we have with this Accounting Connect module, we have the ability to basically map all the data that we're already collecting through our reporting analytics environment, to map that to from a central place of where we're maintaining that data, map that to all the different to the accounting software that the client is using. So that's gives you central control and visibility into exactly how it's being mapped. It also gives you more real-time data updates into your financial system. So in our environment, the moment payroll has been approved and finalized, it generates your GL file, and you can update your finance system with that. And last but not least, the employee portal module is, of course, very important, because at the end of the day, everything that we do in payroll is to make sure that employees get paid properly and that they have visibility into how they've gotten paid. And so with our employee portal, we make sure that employees can receive their pay statements, pay slips, and other related documents, whether it's year-end tax documents or equity allocation plan documents, that they receive that in a modern online manner, and they can access that either through their laptop or through their mobile device, anywhere, anytime. And it's not being sent through email or getting lost somewhere in a paper shovel, but it's nicely archived and organized so the employee can access that information anytime they like. We can also, by virtue of collecting all the pay slips out of local payroll systems and making them, organizing them in our platform, we can also make those pay slips then available out to other HR systems, like, expose them back to Workday or SAP SuccessFactors to let employees access them through that interface. So let's go to the next slide, Sam. So yeah, then kind of putting the technology and the modules that I just talked about on the previous slide into the context of the process model that Max so nicely laid out. So between the pre-payroll steps, the run payroll and the post-payroll, different elements of that technology stack that I just walked through apply to those different parts of the end-to-end flow. So pre-payroll, where we're collecting our data inputs and we're getting ourselves organized to basically launch the payroll, make sure that all the information that's required to process payrolls is properly assembled and checked. That happens with regards to the modules we spoke about in HR Connect, and then Operations Control gives you visibility of the status and where you're at, and gives you oversight in terms of who's accessing what in that data environment. Once we're in the run phase of the payroll process, again, we're keeping track of the tasks and what needs to happen and where we are in our payroll cycle with our workflow and communication module that we call Operations Control. We also have some really powerful data validation capabilities. Max alluded to that. Generally what you want to do is you want to at least be able to check your payroll variances, right? Current payroll calculation versus your previous payroll calculation, see whether there's any deltas and outliers that are not expected or not really easily explained, why there's a movement between the current and previous pay period. So that's kind of output to output, gross to net file to gross to net file. We do that in an automated manner, so you don't have to sift through hundreds of lines of pay elements to see where some of the movements are. Our system does that, flags that automatically for you, and you can set the thresholds and say, I only want to see anything that has movement above certain monetary amount or a certain percentage amount in terms of the deltas. And then the other data validation check that you typically want to make sure you control for is the payroll inputs versus the payroll outputs, right? What was the instruction? What was the change that was actually submitted? And is that coming back out of the payroll calculation? Are you seeing that, hey, we've meant to push through a bonus for Sam of 500 euros this month. Did we pick that bonus up? Did that bonus carry through on the gross to net that's coming back from the payroll vendor? So we have automated checks and validations on the input versus the output as well. So that's on the run side. And then finally, post payroll, key is completion of your end-to-end process, distribution of your pay slips, of tracking that everything has been documented and submitted out to the employees, to the bank files have gone out to the payment process, that your filings to the statutory authorities have been submitted. So we track that as part of the post-payroll process in our Operations Control. And then we give you access to incredible amounts of data in terms of the reporting and analytics that can run on that data once it's been approved and finalized. And finally, as I mentioned, the downstream connection out to the finance system world with Accounting Connect, making sure that data that has been processed in payroll updates the financial system and the chart of accounts accordingly. So that's where that fits in. And then, we have some of the non-cyclical processes, the employee portal, Operations Control, reporting. All those are things that, you don't have to wait for the pre-payroll or post-payroll or run payroll process to kick off. You can obviously access this kind of information on an ongoing basis. All of this is very modular. And maybe that's a good transition to the last few slides here, talking a bit about, putting this into practice with our clients. So we have a couple examples to just highlight how we work with clients and how our clients are using the solution elements that we just talked about. One example here is a company called Blue Prism. They're one of the leading robotic process automation companies. So they're inherently very much focused around using technology in order to drive efficiency and and create automation wherever it's possible. And we're honored and thrilled that they saw the value that our technology platform generates for their payroll environment, with that sort of automation lens that they're looking at, across their entire business. And what we've done with them is their specific starting point is that they have employees across, I think at the time when we started, probably about 10, 11 countries. They've grown in the meantime. But across those different countries, back to Max's point at the beginning, for different populations, it makes sense to consider different operating models, how you actually organize and process your payroll. So in their case, they have their large countries in-house, UK, US, and then I think they've in the meantime also moved, I want to say Germany or France, in-house as well. So sometimes this becomes an evolutionary path as well, right? That you start maybe in-house and then externally, and then you move it in-house, or vice versa. So in their case, they have this sort of hybrid structure, some payrolls in-house, some external, and it's been moving between these different delivery models. And what they were looking for is a way to basically create better oversight and controls over this inherently heterogeneous payroll operating environment, their in-house payrolls and their external partners, and also give them visibility into all their employee data, all their payroll information in one central place. So came to us, we quickly started working with them to deploy operations control and reporting, and rolled that out in record time. In 4 weeks, Blue Prism was up and running. They've been saving themselves tons of time in terms of automating, especially some of their reporting, but also some of their data validation activities in their payroll. Other example then is a pharma company, large multinational company, and this is a great example of the modular approach that Max talked about, and that's possible with our platform, because you could just use, like in this case, this pharma company, they have 20,000 employees, so it's fairly substantial population across 60 plus countries. And one of the big challenges for them was really getting better visibility into all the data that's being generated in the different local payrolls. They have lots of different local payroll partners that they're working with. And so what we've done with them is we put our reporting and Accounting Connect modules on top of their existing payroll system and provider landscape, help them pull all this information together, harmonize the data in one central place. And they're now able to run reports that previously would have taken them weeks to pull together with a push of a button. So it's a great success story as well. And I think that's probably all we have time for today. I'm looking at the clock here, so we're right at the top of the hour. I think that takes us to probably the end of the presentation, and to answer any questions that we might have on the line.
Yeah, we are coming up on time, but hey, if we go over a minute or two, that's fine. So if you have any questions and you haven't popped them into the chat or the Q&A tab, go ahead and do that now. Happy to, talk a little bit more.
I did see one question, Sam and Mark, maybe around the whole GL Connect, which is, I think, sometimes if you have a lot of local payrolls, and you need to get it into a global ERP system. That was the question. So how does Payzaar take those local GTNs and then move them into a standardized GL file? And the second part of the question is, do I need to move away from the vendors to do that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So what we do is we take the local gross to net files, essentially in the raw format that they're created in, that are coming out of the local payroll software. And Payzaar is flexible and configurable to understand different data layouts and different data structures, which is quite normal. That obviously different payroll software will not generate the same output formats. So we can work with that. And then what we do in our backend is we map all the different fields that we're importing out of the local payroll software to a consistent data structure, global data structure. And not only that, in terms of then mapping it to the chart of accounts, we basically have the ability to tell the system exactly what local pay element relates to what needs to be related to what chart of account needs to be captured under what chart of account. And that's, once we set that up and we've mapped that, then every time we import a new gross to net file, it basically starts to populate that chart of accounts. And that, I think I've kind of already answered the second part of the question, means that you don't need to have the local payroll partner change anything. Typically, we can just take exactly the gross to net file that they would be producing out their local payroll system, as long as it's a table format that contains all the different pay elements and employees in a structured manner. We can work with that and map the data to the chart of account.
Perfect. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else with a question?
Maybe we can suggest that the team, if any questions, we're very active on LinkedIn. If you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to either of us. Sorry, I'm speaking on your behalf, Marcus, but at least you're nodding, and reach out at any time, right?
Yeah.
No,
Okay.
absolutely. I mean, you know where to find us. You got the invite to this event, obviously. So and some of you know us personally. So feel free to ping us through any channel, LinkedIn, email, submit something on our website, sign up for a demo or a trial, and be happy to spend more time with you to look at your specific challenges.
Okay. Yeah. I think that, I'll reiterate that. I think we will wrap things up here today. We're a little bit over time. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I hope the session was useful and informative to you. As I said at the beginning, we will be sharing the recording. We're going to upload it to our YouTube channel. We will send you a link to it when that is done. We will, of course, also share the deck with you, so you have access to the slides. We had to skip one of the slides with a little bit more detailed breakdown of the KPIs because we were coming up on time. So you'll have that. And yeah, as Max and Mark said, we're very, very happy to chat further. So if you want to send us a message through any of our social media channels, happy to connect. Thank you so much for joining us today, and see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good rest of the day.